Refresh, something that we've had workshopped recently, and Richard Hughes and Jacques Victor. Richard read the report and had the workshop, of course. Do you have a short presentation or just an introduction?
Just an introduction.
Thank you.
Right, so I'll start. Okay, thank you. So what we are proposing today is a more focused, spatial and effective monitoring framework consistent with the principles of the Auckland Plan refreshed to date. We look to achieve that by changing from the 91 targets, which is currently the underpinning of the current Auckland Plan, to a smaller set of measures with an even smaller set of targets. Those things that we intend to measure are those things that we consider fundamental to creating a strong Auckland. So in the transport space, for example, we're considering things such as travel times and access to various opportunities throughout Auckland, travel choice, etc. To then help prioritise once we've landed a set of measures, we think it's important to provide some targets. The purpose of those targets is to set those things that we, up to a 10-year time frame, that we feel are required here and now. Agreement on those targets will be sought with key stakeholders, but in particular central government, on those areas defined through the terms of reference. In terms of the ongoing monitoring of the Auckland Plan measures and targets, what we're proposing is to report to committee once a year, basically on just how those measures are tracking, and every 3 years we'd be providing a more comprehensive report which basically looks into why those measures are or targets are not tracking or are tracking above or below as expected or wanted. In terms of the feedback to date with the framework, and in terms of what we took through the planning committee, I think it's fair to say there was some nervousness around not so much what we're measuring, but potentially those things that we won't be measuring. That's something we're still having to work through, which we'll be looking to do with the planning committee in future workshops. And we've also had a brief meeting with the central government officers, and in principle they are supportive of where we're going, but there's obviously some detail to be ironed out, especially around how we might be able to set targets and also the timing of that, considering there's a general election coming up, etc. So what we're asking for today is we can proceed with the new proposed monitoring framework, which is effectively a small set of measures which we will continue to measure over the life of the plan, which will then be supported through a smaller set of targets. And as I said previously, we would look to work those measures through with you through planning workshops, with a final point in October bringing a final draft set of measures for your approval, but there wouldn't, in our view, be any targets accompanying that. So that's it really.
Thank you, Richard. I'll move, and Deputy Chair will second the A that is before us. Questions, members? Councillor, who did I see there? Councillor Filipino, I think, and then Councillor...
Oh, no. This is just straightforward.
Go for now. Thank you. Councillor Casey, then Councillor Walker.
Yeah, just give me some idea. You've said this a number of times now, a very small number of targets or a smaller number of targets. What have you got in mind, and when are we going to be party to that? Those are the targets are really important, yeah. And it seems like everybody and their brother is getting to see them before we do. That's what it feels like.
Councillor Casey,
or sister.
I really don't have a particular number in mind, but if I'm just going to have to make something up, it may be that it is something around 30 measures, but maybe we only do around 10 targets.
So when are we getting the list of 91 targets that are currently in the Auckland Plan so that we can see the ones that we're wedded to make sure that they don't slip off your radar?
Yeah. So that we're pulling that list together for you, as you asked the other day. But what the intention is, we're really just asking about the principle, because one can approach this in many different ways. Our recommendation is that from what we've looked at, that this is probably the best way to go. What the intention is that if you agree to this principle, we will bring those potential targets, and we'll have workshops on what those might be to the upcoming planning committees.
See, for me that's back to front. I would rather see what it is we're going to measure before I agree to this. So, do you see what I mean? It's back to front for me. So I probably won't be supporting it today, and that's the reason. I want to know what you've got in mind, because you are talking to everybody. You're talking to stakeholders, you're talking to government, but you're not actually talking to us about the actual targets. Why don't we set the targets, then let everybody else see them?
So we haven't actually spoken to anyone about the actual measures or targets yet. What we've done is, yeah, as I explained the other day, they have just given us 1 or 2 targets because we discussed with them.
Jacques. I'm sure everybody's got
Wait
a
on,
target. they'd like to
let's
give
wait, we need to wait for the answer.
What we're discussing with stakeholders at the moment is the principle of taking this approach, because I think it is important that one sets the kind of principle and the approach that you're going to take, so people are clear. Otherwise, we can discuss things and people have very different understandings of what that might be. So we haven't actually engaged with stakeholders on actual measures or targets. That's kind of what needs to happen after this. As I said the other day, yes, we had a discussion with Sports New Zealand, and they gave us some targets and measures that they thought would be good to include in the plan. I don't even know what those are. They've sent it to us, but I haven't even gotten there. So that's the next step, is to actually look at what these might be.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker?
Sure. Really just want to follow on from the good questions that Councillor Casey was raising, and I guess the context is my concern that we actually dumb ourselves down in terms of the measures and the targets. So I've got a couple of questions. Does reducing the number of targets by implication mean that we're reducing the number of measures that we have across a number of things?
I suppose the intention is we would develop the measures first, and then from that set of measures we'll develop some targets. So measures, then targets. But I suppose the basic answer is yes. What we're proposing is not to have the same approach as last time, where you have 91 in this case targets and hundreds of actions. Because it almost becomes impossible to monitor that, to actually follow up. Everything becomes equal, and so therefore anybody can basically do anything, and it's kind of justified. What you decided earlier in the process is that this plan really needs to focus on the important issues that are facing Auckland. Those issues cover people, they cover the economy, so it's not as if it's just all about one thing. But there needs to be some focus. One way to help focus things is through measures and targets.
Could I add to it? Okay, well,
Sorry, if I could also add to that through the Chair. In terms of the measures, we are also, in the report, sort of stating there will be supporting studies and other frameworks that we'll be borrowing from. So we do envisage a cascade down. So these will be high-level measures, but they will also be supported through other reports, because there's a lot of things we measure in council. So this is not going to be the be-all and end-all, obviously, of our monitoring framework across council, but it will feed into those and feed from them.
I note your emphasis in point 18, a particular focus on housing, transport, supply of business land. What about a number of our fundamentals around quality of our soil, our air, our water, our low carbon requirements to meet our country's Paris goals and the like? Arguably that the government may be slipping on, but that doesn't mean to say that we should not be addressing those as an imperative.
Yeah, I suppose what paragraph 18 says is those are the 3 areas that government wants to focus on, because that's what's in the terms of reference. But that's just with government. We are not suggesting those are the only 3 areas for which there will be measures and targets. It's just the focus with government. Clearly, because there's an outcome around the environment, so there are clearly going to be measures and targets around the environment. And just to take the example that Richard gave, say for example low carbon Auckland, it in itself has measures in it, and so that's the kind of the next level. Those won't disappear, it will just sit in that, and when we do the 3-yearly reporting, those kind of measures and targets that sit in some of council and the stakeholders sit in their strategies, we can wrap up into a comprehensive 3-yearly report.
Ken, my last question, Mr. Chair, is what are we going to do around those measures that conceivably we've been measuring for decades? And are you going to highlight those measures? Because obviously if we stop going forward, at a later point in time, it becomes very difficult to pick up.
Yeah, so again, let's say in the environmental space, there are longitudinal measures there. Of course, those things will carry on. That's part of other responsibilities that the council has. What we are saying is not all of those need to sit in the Auckland plan. They have appropriate homes in different parts of the council. They carry on. It doesn't mean because something isn't in the Auckland plan that it doesn't get measured or that it isn't important. We just need to build a package of measures and targets that speak to the purpose of the Auckland plan.
Thank you. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you. I acknowledge that probably some of the frustration is the fact that alongside Councillor Cathy Casey, I think it's hard to bite down on this issue until we start to see these things. So I've got two questions. My first one is paragraph 27 sets out the time frame for much of the preparation of this work. However, I'm worried that this work is critical to the preparation of the LTP, and I made those points clear at our workshop. So my question is, will we have enough done so that we can actually influence the LTP? Because the concern I have, Mr. Chair, is that we have LTP bids going in as we speak. Didn't think we were doing that, but we are. And apparently they're being run through an LTP template. Who knew? I've no idea how the template's been constructed, because I think the template should be constructed out of the priorities set by the green print, by the Auckland Plan refresh. So we've got a parallel spiral arm of the universe operating here, so I'm worried about the timing. So that's my first question.
Very good question. Councillor Ellis, in terms of the timing for the measures and targets, so what we do intend is to have the measures and draft targets all done by the time that you adopt the draft Auckland plan for consultation. What paragraph 27 tries to explain is that there probably are difficulties in terms of the actual targets, not so much the measures. So central government feel more comfortable around the measures, that we can agree on that and get to a good space there, but they do acknowledge with the election it gets really hard to agree on the targets. So what we will endeavour to do is to work with them as much as we can and develop probably draft targets that they are included in the plan, and communities can comment on those, but so can government. By February, March, government should be in a position where they can agree or change or disagree the draft targets.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, when we do set the targets and understand our priorities, how will we understand the way that they fit together? In other words, will we have a set of priorities that are more important than other priorities? So the measure that concerns me, for instance, one here is that we will measure travel time. Travel time is an interesting measure. It, however, is a measure that can have unintended consequences and could lead to building more and wider roads, which is totally the antithesis to the low carbon action plan that we're looking at.
Yep. So the travel time is an example of one of the existing measures that you will find in the Auckland plan and in many other things. So it was simply put there as something we have. I think that is the debate that has to be had at the workshops. Are these things the most appropriate? And as a package, how do they work to actually focus on the most important things? That was simply an example, but there's an example of an existing measure, which you may or may not agree with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope my questioning doesn't lead anyone to think that I'm not supportive of the work that this team's doing. I am. I, however, restate my deep concern that we are putting the LTP cart before the Auckland Plan refresh course.
Okay, at the workshop, Bill did ask if we could be seeing a process map of the two work streams, 10-year budget and 30-year vision, and the points where they intersect, not just towards the end, but along the way while they're both in draft. Because Councillor Hulse rightly points out that we're progressing a 30-year vision that is at risk, even though I'm being assured by others that there is no risk, of not speaking to the parallel draft 10-year budget. Does that capture the key point? So it would be helpful if we saw that process map showing the two work streams and where they kiss along the way.
We, so you asked for two things last time. Councillor Casey asked for a list of all the measures in the current plan, so we almost there pulling that together. That process map, I saw it this morning. We just want to tweak one or two things and then we can get it out in the next day or two. Yeah.
I was just going to say, could I assure you that the two teams are working together very tightly so that we don't have a mishap there.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I've got some concerns around timing, but my question's really going to be, so really what you're asking here is high level. You're just saying that the framework approach will be evidence-based and meet the criteria of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. That's all you're saying. You're saying, haven't got them yet. What you had before was too many. We couldn't measure them. It was too complex. We want to make it simpler so that it can be evidence-based, obviously show an outcome, but we don't know exactly what they are. But all you're asking us, if I'm not mistaken, is very high level. What we're going to do will match the rules.
Yeah, Councillor Simpson.
Why don't we just, that's it. We can't, there's nothing to debate.
It's really just the in principle.
Yeah.
Because you might change your mind a bit later on when you see the actual measures. But it's just in principle as a starting point.
Getting to the point.
Councillor Casey?
Yeah, well, just to give you one of my favourite targets, which is to end off sleeping by 2020, you're never going to get the government to agree to that because they don't have such a target. So is that one that's it's going to come back to us, or is it one that you're going to take off? So I'm giving myself over to you, and it doesn't feel comfortable because I'm wedded to that one.
Yes, so I can't comment on that actual target, but what I will comment on is not everything in the Auckland plan has to be agreed by government.
Well, that's what I was hearing you. Sorry, I've interrupted you, Jack.
Just on so there are three specific areas that government wants to work with council. So that being the housing, transport and business land. And because that has such an impact on government and its own spending and that, I think it's understandable why government would want to agree with us on those. And I think that's what we should aim for. But there are aspects of the plan that is not really part of government's remit, and I'm not so sure that government would necessarily worry too much about if we want to set targets for ourselves. But so not everything has to be agreed by government.
Thank you. I didn't know that, you see. That's good.
Good. As a point of order, Mr Chair, I think child poverty and homelessness was eliminated last night. I saw it on interview.
Must be true.
Thank you.
And I thought you were so close to
Not quite a point of order. But anyway.
Only up to 100,000, I think.
Other questions, members?
Only.
So, Member Hinari.
I'm going to go to point 31, where it says the Independent Māori Statutory Board Secretariat has provided general guidance on the measures and monitoring approach. With respect to Māori, why not just incorporate the measures already outlined in the 2016 Māori report? I mean, there's thousands of dollars being spent on the 2016 report. Why not just incorporate it?
We have certainly taken that for the Māori identity and wellbeing outcome and other parts of the plan. We have certainly taken that as the starting point, but we need to bring that to you. We can't just make the decision, that's it. But that certainly is our starting.
But you want us to say yes to this without any, I mean, I see point 30, there's been no engagement with either mana whenua or mātāwaka on the proposed monitoring framework. So how are we supposed to say yes or even no?
Yeah, so again, we're just asking for the principle of what this monitoring framework could in principle look like. So reduced number and it's just measures and targets. No, we have not engaged with mana whenua or mātāwaka on measures yet because we are still engaging with them on the outcomes and the development strategy. So on Thursday, we have the next hui with mana whenua working group on the Auckland plan. So we're just working through all of the stuff.
So you say next, the next hui, I mean, that obviously means to me that you've already had one. or 2 or 3 or 4?
Yeah, we've had a few huis
So why is it that you say that there's been no engagement?
on measures. So we've not discussed measures and targets with Mana Whenua.
Isn't it true that there's really sort of ticking the box, really?
Just
I
mention
would,
the role.
I would like to believe that we are trying our utmost to make this a genuine process, and not just ticking the box. For example, we're also engaging with the Whariki network. There's no box that says I have to do that, but it's really helpful. And so we're engaging with them on how they might view this. So we really are trying.
But you want us to say yes
I'm wanting...
without any engagement?
I'm asking for in-principle decision about the basic model, not its content, because if we follow a different model, we will have to go and develop quite different content. So it is just so that we agree on the model so we can develop the content.
That's not what the recommendation asks, though. It doesn't say approve in principle. It says approve the monitoring framework.
Yes, he's right. I mean, you're right.
It does.
And that may be that we then need to change that wording.
You want to add in principle? at
In
this-
principle here, yeah.
Okay, and then we confirm it.
Hold on, it's not
fully-
in principle to match the rules, it's to match the rules.
Sorry, I'll just ask
Sorry.
the staff
Sorry,
to
Mr Chair.
do their job.
The member made a good point there. I use the word in principle because we're not actually signing off the actual monitoring framework with its content. All we're asking for is the principle of how we structure this. So if we need to include the words in principle there to give people comfort, I am happy with that.
I think if you're going to do it, you put it
Sorry.
after approve, right? Approve in principle.
Just a sec, Mr Chairman, if I may.
Question, Councillor Simpson.
We're not, you're not asking us to improve in principle to develop a framework that meets the requirements of the, is this a question? Sorry, what I'm saying, that in principle, you're either developing a framework to meet the standards or you're not, all right? If you're asking to approve the monitoring framework approach to measure progress against the Auckland Plan outcomes and meet the requirements, that's what you're saying. But in principle, you can't in principle meet standards. You're either going to meet the standards or you're not going to meet the standards. So I don't know that you need the in principle. I know you're saying in principle because we haven't got the standards. So you're approving the monitoring framework approach
Yeah.
so that it measures progress against the rules. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's the approach.
Oh, in principle,
rather
you
than
either meet the
content.
rules or you don't. How you do that is secondary, and you haven't told us that yet.
Good point.
That's right, that's right.
Good point. Okay, so any changes here at all? Or leave, I think we're comfortable leaving this, and it's still dynamic. So just,
How do you leave something and then it's still dynamic?
okay,
You either say, as it says in the recommendation here, it says approve the monitoring framework approach.
That's right. So we're asking you to approve the approach, Charles,
Yeah.
not...
Not the
So
content.
Not the
this
content.
is the beginning of a process that will go there. So the team are consulting with a huge range of stakeholders,
not Mark
including iwi. No, they are.
Well, it's
on-
not what it says in the
Wait,
paper.
wait,
does,
please.
It's not what it says in the
on
paper.
outcomes, and when we've all agreed the outcomes, then we consult on the measures. So the measures are this next phase. All Jacques is asking you for at this stage is the approach to the measures so that we're all heading down the same frame. All of this is a measured way to get us there so that when we get to the final content, we've all agreed with the approach and we don't go back to the beginning again. So
Okay,
that's
so
the key.
So then my view is that you shouldn't really say that there's been no engagement.
On,
Because
on the framework.
Oh, shit.
On the framework, there's been none yet, that'll come, but there's been lots of engagement on the plan itself.
But there's,
that's where we're getting
like you and I have had this discussion before about Māori impact statements. And let's not fudge the issue. If you're going to say that there's been no engagement on a particular part, sweet, say that. But then also, be a bit more forthcoming with the information. There's only one, two, three, and I wouldn't even call them paragraphs. You've had a bit of guidance from IMSB Secretariat about a plan that actually cost us thousands, us, the ratepayers, to put together. That I certainly think that we did a hell of a lot of the work for what you're looking for. And if you think I'm talking through a hole in my head in terms of monitoring and a monitoring framework, I was the Minister of Māori Affairs that actually had to monitor not just 91 bits of information, but other government departments as well, in terms of the delivery of service to Māori. Now, it seems to me that outlined in the Māori report, the 216 Māori report in Tāmaki Makaurau, we've done a whole lot of work that actually could not only inform you of where you want to go in terms of the framework for Māori, in respect of Māori, but actually answers a whole lot of questions about how to do it, who to approach, what the framework should be. So what I'm saying is that why not just put it up? Why not put a whole lot of more information in this paper about that? Because I doubt very much whether the councillors know too much about the Tāmaki report, the Māori report in 2016.
Okay, thank you. So members, I think it's clear that we are being asked here to approve the approach, not specifically the monitoring framework. It's the approach to the construct of that, and then implanted under that are the targets to be measured, and they are yet to be determined. Correct?
Correct.
And currently we've got, so that is a real double down on what really is important for Auckland. Currently we're treating with 283 specific actions, 91 targets with the 7 outcomes. And I'd have to say it's probably been a bit scattered, good cut initially, but when you're not tracking them, those targets or those actions and targets become quite superfluous and meaningless when you are not monitoring them. So it's just the framework approach that we're being asked to put our vote of support in behind here today. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. At the risk of being somewhat pedantic, I think we're getting there, and I think everyone is understanding what you're wanting. But do you think you should have, across the monitoring framework approach to measure progress against the as yet to be developed? So for someone who looks at these minutes and doesn't really know where we're at, it's quite clear, quite abundantly clear, that the Auckland Plan outcomes are yet to be developed, so that there's no misunderstanding.
After the words Auckland Plan outcomes, you're saying?
Maybe after against the yet to be developed Auckland Plan outcomes.
If I can just chip in there.
We have developed up some of those outcomes.
It's probably yet to be finalised. So you've
Right,
done...
yet to be finalised, but just so that there is a clear understanding of what is intended here in the minutes.
And yet to be.
Jacques, you're comfortable with that addition? Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure, just, I'm assuming we're speaking to the motion now. Sure, I really want to put my concerns on the table. What I see happening here compared to the original Auckland Plan is a significant dumbing down. That's one thing. And the second thing that concerns me is the Auckland Plan, certainly the previous Auckland Plan, was a plan for Aucklanders. Sure, it was facilitated by council, but it was driven in large part from the outside across a whole range of issues. That's not happening now. We're moving away from that significantly. We're reducing the number of outcomes, and we're doing this without any consultation at this point with the community that was involved in that original Auckland Plan. So I have a real concern here. In a sense, we've moved away from the original Auckland Plan almost completely to just a plan for this council that's been driven by this council and in large part is being driven by officers.
I need to have the staff reply to that because at the last workshop that question was asked and by another, I think. And I'm pretty clear that this is not an Auckland plan for Auckland Council. Can we have that one answered? And also in terms of engagement with key stakeholder groups, I understand that we haven't undertaken the formal consultation, of course, and that will be early next year. But can you confirm, or otherwise, Jacques, that you've been undertaking regular engagement with key stakeholders?
Yeah, in terms of whether it's an Auckland Council plan or a plan for the people of Auckland, I think at every workshop that I have spoken, I have made that point over and over, that this is not an Auckland Council plan, it is for all of Auckland and therefore all Aucklanders, which is why, for example, we have to engage with central government because they are a key stakeholder, a key player who funds a large part of what happens in Auckland. So therefore you have to engage with government. Equally, we have to engage with an absolute wide range of stakeholders, and I use that word because that's what the legislation calls them. So we are bound by legislation to do certain things. We have engaged with a very wide range of stakeholders. I don't think the statement by Councillor Walker that we have not engaged with people is quite correct. That is what has kept us rather busy over the last few months, is engaging with people and testing things and doing workshops with you, and then we go back to them. And so it's a continuous development. It's not as if we're writing a plan and then people just get a say on that. We are developing this plan with people, and that's what we have to do in terms of legislation. So yes, we have engaged and are engaging with stakeholders across the board, whether they be community, environment, cultural, infrastructure providers, whoever they are, we are engaging. But having said that, earlier in the year you also made the decision that that engagement needs to be targeted. So it is not a general engagement where every person in Auckland at this stage yet has the opportunity to give input. We just cannot manage that. So it is targeted, but it covers all aspects of society and all kinds of industries. And so that's what we're doing in working with them, developing the plan as we would with the measures and targets. That's why we need to test things with people.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Through you.
One more question.
The last time I raised this issue, which wasn't that long ago, we had not met, that is, officers had not engaged with any environmental groups. That's what I established the last time I raised this issue. Have we engaged with any environmental groups of any substance since?
Joe?
Again, yes, we have. The approach that we generally took was to engage with groups, because we can't engage with everybody, is that they have to be regional, kind of have a regional spread, but that wasn't a hard and fast rule, because you can't always just apply that. So we've also engaged with groups that are not completely regional. So yes, we have engaged with environmental groups. As I mentioned the other day, in the last committee report, there clearly were missions. For example, EDS, Forest and Bird, that I think it might have been you, Councillor Walker, picked that up, that they weren't in that list. We have engaged with them, or at minimum, asked them to be involved. Of course, we can also not force people to engage with us. So yes, we have engaged with environmental groups and continue to do so.
Let's, I think we're ready to go to the vote on this. It's moved and seconded. Thanks for the inputs, members and staff. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no.
My vote recorded against.
Declare that carried.
Recorded.
And so it's carried 10. We'll go, members, I think I'll just go to the Three Kings. Harry Doig. Yep. Harry, you need to be at a hearing at 3 p.m, don't you? I think we'll go to item 12, and then we'll go back to Karaka and Drury and invite Harry Doig to come up and convey his puka te papa's the local board's view on the report. Welcome, Harry.
Yeah, just before you go on, can we have our names recorded against that?
Against, yes.
Do you want to move this one?
Thank you. Are the two IMSB members?
And mine as
Thank
well,
you.
And Councillor Wang.
certainly.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Harry?
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of this committee. The Puke Tāpapa Local Board